everybody. Welcome. For those who don't know me, I am Kristen Bates, and I am the Dean of the Faculty of Science. Thank you all for attending tonight. EARTHx in this lecture series is truly fabulous, and it's like one of my great highlights here. And today is extra special because it's telling a story that's deeply connected to University of Calgary and also, interestingly, companies based in Calgary. And it's a remarkable story because it's a partnership that is between 5 different groups. We have, and I'm always going to pronounce it probably not quite right, so be patient with me, the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in First Nation, the Yukon Geological Survey, the Yukon Paleontology Program, miners at Treadstone Gold Mine, which are actually a local company out of Okotoks. So way to go, Okotoks. And yeah, rockin' Okotoks. They got the best rock in all of Canada in Okotoks. And the University of Calgary. And this is also about the wonders that are in the land. And before we start, I want us to think about the land that we're here on tonight and begin tonight in a good way. And we want to acknowledge that we live, work, and play here on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai First Nation, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, which include the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Good Stoney First Nation. And of course, Calgary is home to the people of Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. And here at the University of Calgary, we are dedicated to understanding and preserving the land we share. And there are 2 things I want to highlight for you tonight. And our first is our commitment to Indigenous science. Over the last 2.5, 3 years, we have really committed the faculty to thinking more holistically about how we incorporate Indigenous science into our curriculum. We have the fastest growing number of Indigenous faculty for all of the University of Calgary. And they work on wide-ranging topics from water conservation, how do we do Indigenous conservation, to even understanding the microbiome of our Indigenous youth who are diabetic. So we have a wonderful wealth of Indigenous researchers here to bring us that perspective. And this is also critical when we think about what the story we're going to hear today. And this is the story of Nunchoga that you're all here to learn about tonight. And it's an amazing example of how we weave together Indigenous and Western ways of knowing. And when they respect each other and communicate and weave together, we can create something truly amazing. So as Deborah Yedlin and the Chamber of Commerce of Calgary like to say, we are better together. And this includes with our Indigenous and Western ways of knowing. The second thing I want to emphasize tonight is we are home to Canada's largest Department of Earth, Energy, and Environment. When it comes to sustainability, conservation, and understanding our world, we are second to none in this amazing country. And I'm going to give just one example of something I'm so proud of. We are launching in fall of 2025 Energy Science program. So this is a Bachelor of Science in Energy Science. We're excited to share this to the world at the open house, which is happening in just a couple weeks' time. And this is a program unlike any other program in Canada. Not only is it about energy science, so you can learn about oil, you can learn about wind, geothermal, liquid nitrogen gas, nuclear and beyond, but it's putting it in a context of economics, of policy, of communications, of Indigenous science. So a student will come out not just understanding the discipline, but understanding the entire system that they will then go out into the world and impact. Because Calgary and Alberta, we are today and we will remain to be the energy drivers of this great country. And our goal is to ensure that we're graduating students who can meet the needs of not just today, but as we move through that energy transition. So I encourage you, if you have any, if you are a student, high school student, how many high school students are here today? I see you. I know you don't want to put your hands up. That's okay. I have one at home right now. Or if you know somebody who's about to apply to university, I encourage you to tell them about this program because it is truly, truly phenomenal. And now let's get our show started and hear about Nuncho Ga's amazing story. And those who have attended an EARTHx event before, he needs no introduction, but I have to introduce him anyways. So I'd like to introduce you to Dan Sugar, who will be starting us off on this amazing story.
Good evening, everybody. So my name is Dan Sugar. I am a professor in the Department of Earth, Energy, and Environment, and also the director of the Environmental Science program here at the University of Calgary. Welcome to EARTHx. This is our department seminar series, and it has been generously supported by the Gallagher family. And we're grateful for the Gallagher family's ongoing support that enables us to bring guest speakers, amazing stories, insightful topics to this stage, both in person as well as online. And so on behalf of all of us, thank you to the Gallaghers. I'd also like to thank Alumni All Access and the UCalgary alumni team for their support in helping to organize and publicize tonight's event. And so from philanthropy to volunteering and community engagement, our alumni create a richer experience for all of us. They give back to our community in many ways. And so for all of the alumni in the room, and I know there are quite a few of you joining us in the room tonight as well as online, it's great to have you with us. So we've organized tonight's event as a hybrid. We can continue to engage with attendees from all over the world, as well as those, of course, in the room here. And we're ecstatic to have you all here with us. So no matter how you're joining, we're glad that you've decided to spend at least part of your evening with us. So we're going to have talks, and we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, both from our online as well as in-person audiences. If you're joining us online, you can email questions to SCI events, S-C-I events at ucalgary.ca, and we'll put that email address up on the screen later. So it's not every day that you get to be part of something truly incredible, something so unusual, so awe-inspiring, that it gives you goosebumps literally years later. And so 2 years ago, I was sitting in a Yukon government travel trailer, parked at the Bonanza Gold Motel and Campground, or the Bozo Motel, as it showed up on my credit card statement later. When I got to take part with some of my students, one of whom you'll hear from in a couple of minutes, got to take part in something extraordinary. So I was sitting in this trailer, working on my computer, trying to submit a grant proposal on pretty terrible Wi-Fi, when Jeff Bond, who's tonight's first speaker, burst through the front door of the trailer. He says, "We got to go, there's a mammoth." Now, I don't know about you, but when somebody says, "We got to go, there's a mammoth," I think a natural reaction is to put that aside and ignore it, and continue with your grant proposal, which is due, in an hour. But Jeff was pretty insistent. "No, really, we got to go. There's a mammoth." So tonight you're going to hear the rest of that story from some of the people at the very heart of it. So our speakers tonight are Jeffrey Bond, Elizabeth Hall, and Debbie Nagano. Jeffrey is the founder of Mammoth Terrain Incorporated. He's a surficial geologist, which basically means he's interested in the parts of the earth that you can see just by walking on top of it. And he's a former manager with the Yukon Geological Survey, so Yukon government. Jeff played a leading role in the recovery of the baby mammoth, Nuncho Ga, and led the geological investigations of the site. He's a UCalgary alum, having completed a Bachelor of Science in Physical Geography here at U of C, and then a Master of Science in Geomorphology at the University of Alberta. Elizabeth Hall is the Assistant Paleontologist with the Yukon Paleontology Program. She's a long-term Yukoner, passionate about fossils, especially Ice Age mammals, which of course we're going to hear about today. And she decided to become a paleontologist when she was only 6 years old, after spending time not too far from here in the Alberta Badlands. She spends most of the summer in Yukon finding fossils, and the rest of the year in the lab playing with those fossils and bones. And so she's especially interested in pathologies in past and present animal populations. And last but not least, Debbie Nagano is the Director of Heritage for the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in First Nation. She's an artist, a Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in citizen, and member of the Wolf Clan. She's worked for the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in government for most of her adult life with a focus on culture and well-being. Her lifelong connection with the land has given her knowledge about our role in maintaining its integrity. So, Drin Hozo, welcome to Debbie, Jeff, and Elizabeth. We're grateful and honored for you to be here with us. So please join me in welcoming our speakers, but don't come up to the stage just yet. So I'd like to invite our first speaker just for a couple of minutes to the stage. My pleasure to introduce Holly Baziuk. Holly is a master's student in the University of Calgary's Department of Earth, Energy, and Environment, and was part of the team with Jeff who helped recover Nuncho Ga from the permafrost just over 2 years ago.
So when I was invited to join a research trip to Dawson City, Yukon, I didn't quite know what to expect. So like any good researcher, I read the local poetry, stories, and fiction because to know a place, you must know the stories, past and present. The way the Yukon is described gave a sense of magic and awe, and while reading the tales of the midnight sun or the gold between the cracks in the sidewalk in Dawson City, I had a feeling that the Yukon still had many stories still yet to be uncovered. So when we set out to uncover the geologic tale of a landslide that we were studying with Jackson Bodker, who is sitting in the audience tonight, I never imagined that I would end up picking mammoth fur out of the permafrost. Nor was I particularly prepared for the sensory overload that came with such a task. My efforts that day resulted in about a snack-sized Ziploc of fur and the sacrifice of my emergency blanket as a tarp for a rough tote. But more importantly, I became part of a community, one that's electric with curiosity and enamored by this discovery. So many people played a big part and a small part along the way in this story, from the biologist who was so excited to write baby mammoth on the walk-in freezer storage sheet, to the experts that we have here with us tonight. I am thrilled that you've joined us this evening to celebrate this incredible discovery that has brought together people across disciplines, across cultures, and across our country. Here's to yet another wonderful and beautiful, strange tale of things done in the midnight sun. Please welcome me in joining Jeff Bond.
Well, welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be in front of a hometown crowd. This is a place that's very dear to me, graduating from here in 1992. And when I, with the help of the University of Calgary, as we'll get into sort of that story a little bit more and the role that Dan and Holly and Jackson played in the story, we really wanted to do something here for the university to recognize their contribution. And so I emailed Dan or texted him, and I think I said, oh, maybe we could do a little department talk on a Friday, have some beers, and it turned into this, and this is just great. So I'm super thrilled. It's a beautiful venue, great crowd, and tonight we want to share with you the story of Nuncho Ga. So, as I mentioned, I'm from this land. I grew up in the shadow of the Okotoks, the big rock, just south of town, and just south of Calgary. And that's a 20-year-old me on top of the rock. And I just want to sort of recognize that this is a very special place for me, and all the more reason to sort of present this here tonight is to sort of recognize my roots and recognize the land and the people that call this home. So thank you so much for having us. Particularly, I want to thank the Department of Earth, Energy, Environment for hosting us tonight and providing this wonderful venue to tell this tale. So at the core tonight of what we're going to be talking about is a baby mammoth, and it is thousands of years old. And a mammoth tusk, of course, has many layers to it. And so at the core, we're talking about a mammoth, but we're talking about more than that. We're talking about all the sort of different aspects that come with it, the culture, the people, the ideas, these different worlds that are coming together that create the layers to the mammoth tusk. And so tonight we will be, it's a complex story. And when you have all these different groups sort of coming together and thrust together to sort of interpret a story, to tell a story, and to participate in it. And so like this tusk, we're going to be peeling back the layers to get to the root of the story of Nunchoga, and sort of what is the reverence of this mammoth. So tonight we're going to be talking about Beringia. Beringia is sort of a lost continent. It's the connection between North America and Asia that forms during ice ages. When you have sea level drop due to the building of ice sheets on the land, you create Beringia. And so we are located in eastern Beringia, in the Yukon in Alaska, and at times we are connected with Asia and Siberia and Russia to the west. And it's a vast landmass that's periodically exposed during Earth's history, and it plays a really important role in our story tonight. Most importantly, probably, is it's symbolic of the crossroads of the two different sort of worlds coming together. You have the old world of Asia meeting the new world of North America. The bringing together of Western science and indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And so it's in many ways, Beringia is very, very symbolic of sort of the story of Nunchoga tonight. So mammoths first came to North America from Asia approximately 1.5 million years ago. Nunchoga's relatives arrived in North America well over 1 million years ago via the Bering Land Bridge. And it wasn't just a one-way street. There were many dispersals of horses, for example, that originated from the Americas and were traveling sort of westward across the Bering Strait into Asia and beyond. Of course, the first people coming into Canada, Alaska, into the lower 48, into South America and beyond, were arriving onto the continent via Beringia as well, some 15,000 to 30,000 years ago. Debbie's ancestors were part of this group of people that were coming to the Yukon 20,000 years ago. So very, very special place, and it's very deeply rooted in sort of the cultures of Beringia. This is the map of the different First Nations within the Yukon. There are 14 First Nations. 11 of those First Nations have final agreements, means they're self-governing First Nations. And this story is especially powerful, I think, because it's a good example of what a First Nation is able to do when it is self-governing, when it is in control of its heritage programs and can be involved and play an active role. And that's exactly what the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in is doing with Nunchoga. They're providing the leadership in this program. So there's many, many First Nations. Some have overlapping territories in the Yukon. And we're primarily focusing on the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in. The Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in are located in west central Yukon, up against the border with Alaska. And one of their more famous locations was on the banks of the Klondike River, right at the confluence with the Yukon River. And this is a picture of one of their fish camps. And the migration of salmon up the Yukon River and into the Klondike River was a very, very important location for them to harvest harvest fish and really build supplies up. In 1896, this all changed for the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in, and with the arrival of some of the first prospectors and gold miners in the Dawson City area and in the Klondike. And these folks were coming from the south. They'd probably never encountered permafrost before. And in this photograph, you can see a mammoth tooth resting on top of the sluice box holding that board down. So they were starting to uncover these fossils in their mining efforts, and they were probably wondering, what the heck is this? You know, what is this bone? What is this, hoof or what have you that's coming out of the frozen dirt? And this is one of the famous skulls that was extracted from Quartz Creek, one of the Klondike Gold Rush streams. And this came out of a shaft underground. And you can imagine the hole that had to have been dug to pull out an entire skull. Anyways, you can start to get, what were the conversations like of people in their cabin talking about they're probably asking, what the heck were elephants doing in the subarctic in the past? And it didn't necessarily make sense to them at the time. And we're still trying to figure out sort of what these animals were doing and sort of where they were from and what their ancestry is all about. So we asked some of the same questions. Uh-oh. There we go. So with those discoveries that the miners were making in the Klondike, in the permafrost, finding these skulls and other bones and fragments, it really drew the attention of some of the museums across the globe, actually. And so the American Museum of Natural History sent an expedition to the Yukon in 1907, the Smithsonian in 1904, Natural History Museum of Paris in 1904 are all going to the Klondike to collect specimens from the permafrost at that time. And this is just after the gold rush. And so it's really, the Klondike has always been sort of a hub of scientific interest when it comes to sort of Ice Age animals and sort of the environments in the permafrost that is preserved there. So this was a really, really important part of what's going on there. This is the vessel that holds these wonderful examples of sort of these Pleistocene worlds. And this is the what's called Yedema in Siberia. It's called muck in the Klondike. All that shiny stuff is massive ice. Those are ice wedges. This is Elizabeth Hall here for scale. She's going to be coming up to speak tonight as well. And this is the overburden that the miners are trying to get through to get to the gold-bearing gravel. There's many ways to extract this material, to remove it, whether it's by water cannons or it is using heavy equipment today. But that is what's being dug through in many of the creeks, and in that process, you're revealing these really impressive paleontological finds, along with a lot of information about the past environments in where they lived. So permafrost will play a very, very important role in our story tonight. Without it, you wouldn't necessarily have this beautiful preservation of a baby woolly mammoth. We are located in this story in the zone of discontinuous permafrost, so it's not 100% coverage on the landscape. So first of all, what is permafrost? Permafrost is ground that's frozen for more than 2 years, steady. And in the Klondike, we're in a zone of discontinuous permafrost, so not everywhere in the landscape you're going to find that temperature in the ground, but for the most part it will be frozen. So on north-facing slopes, really cold aspects of the landscape, you're going to be in a permafrost environment. And so a lot of the fabulous Pleistocene mummies, fossil mummies that have come out of the ground have come from Siberia, and Elizabeth's going to tell us about that. And that is in the zone of continuous permafrost. So it's a little bit unusual to have something so spectacular from the discontinuous permafrost. but it's not entirely rare, as you will hear shortly. So this is what's called a hydraulic monitor, and I was telling you about different ways of extracting the permafrost and that overburden and washing it down the creek to get at the gold-bearing gravel. This is one of the ways, and I'm just going to pass the mic to Elizabeth. We're going to do a bit of a dance.
So the hydraulic monitoring is actually one of our favorite ways to discover fossils. Basically, the water is slowly melting across, and what this means is that the bones are more complete. Another way to remove the overburden is to use the equipment, but often you're potentially cutting up those fossils. They dump the material elsewhere, maybe you don't see those fossils. So when we go looking for fossils, we tend to target the mines where they do this hydraulic monitoring. And here in front of us is actually not a miner. That is Deke Mole, and he is probably the world's leading expert on proboscideans, or woolly mammoths. So this is an example of some of the bones that we could potentially find out in the Klondike goldfields. Our program has been around for about 20 years, and we are interested in all fossils that are found in the Yukon from all time periods, but the majority of our fossils are actually these Ice Age mammals. So in these pictures, you can see bones in front of my colleague, Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in. She's my partner in crime. We go out in the gold fields. We go looking for bones. We often find a lot of bison. There's, you can see caribou antler in these photos. There's large bits of woolly mammoth. Susan at the top is there with an Ice Age horse, and in the bottom is one of my favorite bone collectors. That's Ben. You can see me bending over to confer with him about the bones that we have just found, and now I no longer bend over to confer with him. I actually am looking up at him. So we find a lot of bones. This wouldn't happen if we did not have the cooperation of the miners. Here we're seeing, you might recognize Parker from Gold Rush series, if you guys have seen the Gold Rush. He's there with two of our summer students, and at that particular mine, they weren't monitoring, but they actually came across some bones, and in the end, it turned out it was something like 3 individuals, so there's 3, maybe a family of woolly mammoths. Just off to the side is Guy Favron. He's holding a mammoth femur. His particular mine site, this is one that affectionately is known as, oh, I'm blanking on it right now. Anyways, it's out in the goldfields. It is the site where we found Jur a couple years ago, which is a Ice Age wolf pup. Now, mammoths have been known about for quite some time, and there's always been stories in Siberia about these strange creatures that look like mice that lived underground, but were the size of like maybe a bison. And one of the first mummified remains of mammoths found was in 1799. Now, this was reported, it was found by an Evenki man, a hunter named Ossip. I've forgotten his last name, but that's all right. So it was reported in 1799. It took them about 7 years to go to this particular site. And by the time they were able to recover this mammoth, most of the flesh had been removed by scavengers. So this fairly complete mammoth is still on display in Vienna. So why do we get mummified remains? So as Jeff mentioned, the permafrost plays a big part in preserving fossils in the north. This picture is showing basically where mummified remains have been found. So the black dots are all of the woolly mammoths that have been found across the whole Arctic. There has been remains of other creatures like cave lions and woolly rhinos and wolf pups. But in order to become a fossil, you basically need to be preserved in time. And the best way to be preserved in time is to be entombed in sediment. Now, this is probably going to guarantee that at least we'll be preserving the bones, but in order to preserve the flesh, you need to slow down that process. And the best way to slow down that process is to be encased in permafrost. It's like falling into a giant freezer in time. And what happens being encased in the permafrost is a very, very slow desiccation of the soft tissues. And if you can get that, if you can get the entombment, if you had the permafrost, there's a high probability that you possibly could get a mummified remain. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about some of the more famous mummified remains that have been found across the Arctic. This is, for us, this is the unicorn. This is a woolly rhino. We have never found a woolly rhino in eastern Beringia. So there's never been one found in Alaska, in the Yukon. They've only ever been found in Siberia. And it is my dream and my hope and my wish that one day we're going to find a woolly rhino. Now, what's really cool about this particular specimen, it was found in a gold field, at a gold mine in Russia. Probably had fallen into something like a crevasse. Unfortunately, when it was excavated, the skull was detached from the rest of the body. But it's an adult female, and we know that it's a female because we can see part of the genitalia. And what is super, super cool about this is because finding these animals, we find their remains, but we don't know a lot about their biology. And finding mummified remains like this can give us insight into their biology. So what they've discovered with this particular female was that she has nipples, which we would expect. But it's the number of nipples that's actually quite exciting. So she has 2. So that means that she could have had 1 to 2 kids at one given time. So up until this moment, we had no idea just how many babies a woolly rhino would have at one given time. This is the world's best preserved mummified remains. This is Sparta, and it's another female. She was a couple weeks old when she died, and the reason why she is the best preserved remains probably is because she died in her den and was entombed in sediment. There is no evidence of predation. There's no evidence of anything like that. So basically, she's fairly complete. She has all of her fur. When they did an X-ray and they looked at her teeth show that she should be quite a bit older. If we were to think of her as aging in terms of how lions age today, her teeth were too advanced for her size, but that has to do with being born in the Arctic. So when you live in higher latitudes, there's more seasonality. Summers are shorter, and you need to be ready for the winter. So animals that live in the Arctic have to get ready faster, and that's probably why her teeth seem to be more advanced for her size. This is Luba, and Luba is the world's best preserved woolly mammoth. I wish Nunchaka was the world's best preserved woolly mammoth, but unfortunately when she was excavated, she was actually torn in two. But what we know about Luba, looking at her, is that she's a female. There's no hair seemingly preserved with her, and that's probably has to do with how she died. They were able to do a CT scan, and with the CT scan, they were able to see that there was sediment inside of her trunk, inside of her mouth, in her throat, and she probably died in some sort of muddy slurry and asphyxiated. This is Blue Babe. Now, this picture isn't really doing it justice, but Blue Babe has vivianite on the outside. And vivianite is a type of iron phosphate that when it oxidizes, when it's exposed to oxygen, it turns this bright blue color. Now, what's really cool about Blue Babe is that it does have evidence of predation. Towards the back, you can see scratch marks, you can see tooth puncture wounds. Where the hump is towards the skull, that flap of skin actually was pulled back so that probably something like a lion could start feeding on Blue Babe. There's a bit of disarticulation that happened when that predation began, but because Blue Babe died probably in the fall, maybe early winter, shortly after being preyed upon, he froze. And then he was just too tough to eat. And so then he was entombed, and this is how we get Blue Babe today. So we've moved from Siberia into Alaska, and now we're heading into the Yukon. And I'm going to tell you a bit of some of our mummified remains. This is a black-footed ferret. It's fairly complete. It's missing one part of the right hind leg. We don't know how this particular individual died. There is a bit of fracture on one of the femurs, but it was discovered by a dog. So it's not just paleontologists, it's not just miners finding fossils. It could be a dog. The black-footed ferret was thought to have gone extinct in 1978, and then it was discovered by another dog, actually. So it's pretty cool. Now, this is what I affectionately refer to as Beady Boo. It's a caribou. She's a female. This was discovered in 2006, just right at the beginning of our field season. We got an email from Tony Beats, and he is another character on Gold Rush, saying that he found this mummified remain that looked like a leather jacket and that we should come and get it. And so we were just in the process of moving our trailer up to Dawson for the summer and took the trailer up, went out the next day, and sure enough, it was this caribou. Now, unfortunately, this area was being mined by the hydraulic monitor, and perhaps was the backside of the caribou was ripped in half by that monitor and maybe fell into the water and washed away. We were unable to recover the rest of this caribou. But once again, it's a female. Probably about 6 months aged. You can see the antler buds on the top and potentially perished in the fall. Now, this is Jur, which is the Han word for wolf. Jur is potentially the world's best preserved wolf pup. Once again, a female. We know this looking at the external genitalia. Jur was about 6 to 7 weeks when she died, and because she's so well preserved, she probably was entombed in sediment and probably from something like a den collapse. Now, there is a little bit of wear at the back, and that could have been in the recovery process. Jur is roughly 57,000 years old. She was beyond the range of radiocarbon dating. Which also I didn't mention with the caribou, was also beyond the range of radiocarbon dating. We were able to sort of bracket her age using DNA and stable isotope analysis. We know based on the DNA that she is in a clade of gray wolves that are basically basal to all gray wolves in North America. We also know, looking at the stable isotope work, that she, at this point, was weaned, had stopped drinking mother's milk, and was probably feeding on salmon. Okay, and with that, I'll pass back over to Jeff.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So now we can explore the Nunchoga story in more with some context of how these wonderful creatures are preserved. So the discovery of Nunchoga occurred in the Eureka Creek Basin. This is a historic mining drainage within the Klondike goldfields. It's 60 kilometers as the crow flies from Dawson City to the southeast. If you were to drive on the goldfield roads, it's about an hour and 45-minute drive one way to get to Eureka Creek. This is Eureka Creek down on the bottom left-hand side of the photograph. This is what's called the right fork of Eureka Creek. So we're looking down the drainage here. The gold mine is in the left-hand side of the screen. You can see the camp on the far left, and you can see their excavation or their cut just opposite or out in front of the camp. And what I want you to notice, most important thing here in this image, is this small drainage coming in right here into Eureka Creek. It's a very small creek. There's hardly any water in it. It's a creek that's, in dry times would run dry, and in wet times you would have water flowing. But it's a very, very small drainage. So they're mining right at the confluence of this small creek and Eureka Creek. And so a lot of the sediment that you see exposed here is coming out of that drainage or associated with Eureka Creek. It's a kind of a combination of the two. So we're just going to do a little flyby here of over the gold mine. This was taken shortly after Nunchoga was found. And as you're flying over the excavation, you'll see some flagging tape in the bottom of the cut. That was where Nunchoga was found. And then the video is going to skip to another video that shows an excavator ripping into the permafrost with a ripper tooth. And that's really important because that's how they were excavating the permafrost when they found Nunchoga. They were using a ripper tooth on the boom of the excavator to peel back the permafrost. So really what he was trying to do at the time of discovery was square up the bottom of the cut so that as you're going down and excavating down towards your gold-bearing gravel, you're keeping a nice vertical face. And so periodically you have to go in and square up the cut with the ripper tooth on the excavator. So I'll just run these two videos here. Much of the sediment that you see exposed here is that muck. It's primarily silt with a lot of massive ice in it or permafrost. So silt and organics. So this is all ancient organics that are preserved in time in the permafrost, and we'll go through sort of the age of everything here in a second. You'll see the tape, the flagging tape where the mammoth was found. Notice how muddy it is in the floor of the cut. This is the ripper tooth on the excavator. It's exactly what he was doing when the mammoth was found. On June 21st, 2022, at about 11:30 a.m., Travis Dolofsky from Treadstone Gold Mine was doing some excavating in the cut. He had been only working with Treadstone for about a month. He'd only been in the Yukon for a month. He lives in High River, Alberta, and he had gotten this job, and he was keen. He was told to go down there, square up the cut with the ripper tooth, and watch out for fossils as well, because his boss was, it's pretty common to find bones and things like that. So he was watching the cut when the baby woolly mammoth fell out of the permafrost and rolled down towards his excavator. And the front half of the mammoth rolled down towards him initially. The back half of the mammoth was in the section still frozen. And so he'd ripped the two in half. But at first he didn't know what it was. He radioed his boss. He said, "There's a body that's come out of the permafrost." And He thought maybe bison, but upon closer inspection, you can see the trunk is curled up underneath the head, and he pulled the trunk out, and it was obvious to him then at that time that it was a mammoth. And so they quickly gathered that front half and took it up to the camp and put it in a excavator bucket there and phoned the paleontologists at the Yukon government, Grant Zazula and Elizabeth Hall, notified them that they'd found something unusual. And so then Travis, being on the ball, went back down to the cut with and carefully excavated the rest of the mammoth out of the section and took that up to camp so that the two pieces were together. At the time when the mammoth came out of the ground, it was still pink. It had some hair on it that subsequently fell off. There wasn't very much hair on it, as you will see. But with oxidation, the skin tone to the mammoth slowly changed from a skin tone color, like a pinkish color, to more of a gray. This is where I came in, and my friends were there to help as well. And Dan and Holly sort of set the stage for this part of the journey of this discovery. We were in Dawson City. We were working on landslides. Jackson Bodker was getting set up with his master's project there. It was a holiday for most people. We had decided to have a little bit of an easier day. We were going to go into the gold fields. I was going to show them how to gold pan, maybe look at a few mine cuts, and do a bit of a field trip for the afternoon. And at about 1:30 or so, I got a email from Grant that said, we need some help. And he'd sent this out to a lot of people. We need some help. There's a mammoth that's been recovered in the gold fields at the Treadstone Gold Mine on Eureka Creek, and we need someone to go get it. And so we were like incredibly well prepared to do this. We had geological stuff in the back of our truck. I had a team of people. I was working with my coworker Derek Cronmiller at the time. So myself and Derek, Dan, Holly, and Jackson all got into the pickup truck and raced out to Eureka Creek to get this mammoth. So this is us arriving at the excavator bucket, taking the blankets, taking the sleeping bags off of Nunchoga and having a look at her for the first time. And I'll tell you, it was a very emotional moment. We put the blankets back on, knowing that we had a brief window to investigate where Nunchoga was found. And these exposures change so rapidly. It's warm out, it's June. This is summer, this is solstice, the 21st of June. And so you have extremely long days. It was pretty warm out. And there was a limited opportunity to really get your eyes on the location where she came from. So we put on our rubber boots. We walked down to the cut. And Dan took this, I love this photo that Dan took, because it captures sort of the slop that you're walking through in the bottom of the cut, like the massive ice that's being excavated by the ripper tooth on the excavator there in the foreground creates this maze and challenging terrain to walk through. And it's melting rapidly, so you're up to your ankles almost all the time. So that's us meeting Travis, who found the mammoth, and he walked us over to the discovery location. And we spent about 2 hours there working, just doing a really quick analysis of the stratigraphy. We weren't interpreting, we were simply just describing what we saw there and getting a sense of what the deposit looked like. At the time, Nunchoga was found about 8 meters below the surface. So that was sort of the height of the section at the time. There's Holly. Her main job was collecting fur off of miscellaneous pieces of frozen mud and putting it in a Ziploc bag, something she'll probably never do again. We described the stratigraphy. Jackson and Dan ran around and collected a few other bones from the same sort of stratigraphic level. And then there's some close-ups of the materials that were left there. Some mammoth fur. It is a little sort of a reddish black color. It definitely has a reddish hue to it. And there was a small piece of intestine that was ripped out during sort of the excavation process that had been left behind. So we were able to fortunately gather that last little bit of her and preserve that as well. And so then I walked back to the truck, which was like a 5-minute walk through the muck, and left these guys at the section to do a little more work, and I was going to fly my drone just to get a few pictures before we would head back to Dawson and get the mammoth into the freezer. And that is when I noticed this storm brewing, coming up the valley, coming up Eureka Creek towards us. And I managed to get the drone up very, very briefly, got a dozen or so photographs, turned it around, and snapped this photo of the storm coming up the valley. And this storm really sort of set the tone for the recovery effort that afternoon, because up until then we'd been in the sunshine, it had been beautiful, and then it was almost like the mammoth spoke to us and it said, it is time to go. Because when that storm arrived, it was an absolute deluge. There was lightning all around us. They shut down the mine for probably half an hour or so. We sat in the car. We had to back the car up to the mammoth, put it into Rubbermaid bins, and that's us lifting the mammoth into the Rubbermaid bins to get it into the truck to get out. At first we were hesitant to get out of the vehicle. I mean, there was that much lightning around, and you got heavy machinery all around you, and we just sat there in the truck for a couple seconds thinking about it, and it's like, we gotta go, we gotta get this thing. The excavator bucket's filling up with water, it's raining that hard, and we did that, we were safe in that respect, and we got the mammoth into the vehicle and started the drive home. And I was dry. Jackson, Holly, and Dan were not dry. They were somewhat hypothermic on the drive back to Dawson, so we had the heat cranked. They had got completely soaked in this process. We drove back to Dawson, and freezer space had been organized in the meantime by Elizabeth and Grant Zazula at the Yukon government, and so they directed us as to where to take the mammoth. We pulled up to this bay where the freezer is located. We took the mammoth out of the Rubbermaid bins and we laid it on this tarp, just something we could lift it more carefully into. We didn't do the best job putting her back together, so a lot of the photographs that you see are sort of, it's not her sort of natural morphology, but it is. This is certainly my favorite photo from the day, and it highlights the experience for us and the enthusiasm and the excitement and sort of everything that had gone on for us in sort of this recovery process. So just want to sort of recognize my colleagues for their efforts on this day and for bringing Nunchoga back to safety. So now I'd like to call upon Debbie. She will come up and tell you about sort of the ceremonies and cultural protocols that have sort of developed and followed the initial day of discovery.
Good evening. Nunchoga is for our self-government. We were self-governed in 1996. The first thing that our First Nation completed was our Heritage Act. And a lot of our acts, policies, guidelines begins with a story. You've never ever seen a policy or a guideline written in that way. We understand it, so that's why we follow it quite closely. So it sets up in a more of a holistic way of thinking, and the science and the Western way is put aside for now. And we always have to remember to do things in a very respectful way. So we have our self-governed agreement. It's one of the best in the world, I think. I'm quite proud of it. We have settled that, and it took a long time coming, a lot of negotiations. A lot of people and elders have passed that completed that self-government agreement. And then, of course, our Heritage Act. We have set up within our government different departments. One is Heritage. We have a staff of probably about 9. In the summer, we have close to probably about 14. We have Fish and Wildlife. That department consists of probably about 20. We're probably the second highest employment government in Dawson City. YTG is highways is probably the first. We have close to probably about, and counting, is probably about 1,400 citizens throughout the world. Majority of them are aged in the range of youth. So I'm going to begin how I was brought into this story. It was Aboriginal Day. We prepped for Aboriginal Day probably about a week in advance. We make sure the elders are all taken care of. They're ready to be part of this day. So I was sitting with probably about 8 elders, and we start our Aboriginal Day by ceremony. And our chief was doing the opening prayer, and we were doing the smudge at that time. I happened to have my cell phone, which is very uncommon because it was a holiday, and we were all not working that day. I had my phone go off probably about close to 16 times in a duration of probably about 10 minutes. So I thought I'd better answer. And again, I'm standing beside my chief, council, and my elders. So I pull it aside and I look, and there's a photo of New Choga, and it was Grant that was sending a lot of messages, and I think that email was probably about 16 people that were notified of the finding of New Choga that day, and it started for me at 12 o'clock. So again, I keep looking at it because I can't picture this in my head. I can't figure it out. I'm not even handing it over to my chief at this time, and I'm looking at it. I'm trying to figure it out, and it looks like an elephant, and then it's a baby, and there's no tusks, and I'm like, and everyone's doing speeches, and I'm just like, I just couldn't figure it out. And it took close to probably about 6 minutes, long 6 minutes. Then I finally handed the phone over to my chief. The chief looks at me and she says, this is it's gonna set precedents, and we have the authority, and we will be taking over New Choga in a respectful way. This is different of the way we do business in the Yukon. We have a lot of miners, a lot of other stakeholders, taking gold, everything else from the land. We're always on the sideline, not knowing to take the initiative, to take control over. Once I handed it to the chief handed it to the elders, and the elders gave the nod. And this is all done without people even talking. So there was 4 elders that were sitting there, and they gave the nod to our chief. That was it seems like it was just short for me 2 years ago. Lots of work, because again, we got to do it in a holistic way, and every part has to fit in. Even hiring a film crew, it had to go through, we just didn't want just any film person to follow and tell the story of Nuu-chah-ga. Even doing the scientific tests and all the things behind it. Even making the decision to preserve it took close to 2 months. So it's a long process. And we always are questioned by our elders is, if you can do it in a respectful way and it can help us as a First Nation, then we will do it. But there's a lot of times that if it doesn't fit, it's going to be a no, and that'll cut down that until we know that we can do it in a respectful way. So this day it was brought back by Jeff and the youth. I call them youth. They were just young back then. Now they're just all grown up. That was another reason too. It was the impact of Nuu-chah-ga was it was just unbelievable, and the elders connected to these young individuals and Jeff right away, just because they did it with such respect. We had to give our ancestor a name, a First Nation name right away. Majority of my speakers are all past. I have one left that speaks our First Nation language. He has passed last year. It takes a long process to name anything. It's a story also too. The name is more than what the words mean. It's a story within a paragraph. So I thought the chief and the elders, they told me I had to do this before anything else happens, and it usually takes months. And that morning, the elders got together with this elder, and translators were there, and this happened within 2 hours, and that set precedence for our First Nation. So so we all went, and we all gathered together, and all the elders wanted to do prayer on Nuu-chah-ga, and they were starting to organize themselves, and a committee would be eventually put together. So, but there was more players that day, especially with the gold miner. It was just unreal that he stopped what was happening in the past, and we're trying to work together now because we do need the miners to find these mammoths. So both parties have to try to figure it out. I'm finding that there's more contact with First Nation, and of course with YTG now. After Nuu-chah-ga has been found, they phone us right away. You know, and it's a starting point, which is very good. So Brian really helped us in that part of it. And also the government of Yukon government. We've been working with Yukon government for years, and we already had that connection. So we have the elders, miners, YTG, and the elders always wanted to include the youth to be part of it. So that's why you see we have training positions that were involved also too. And this is Brian here, McGoggin. He's the miner that found Nuchoga. So the next day, after we put Nuchoga in the, we didn't even have a walk-in freezer. So the YTG made room for us in their walk-in freezer, which was good. We thought we would order a walk-in freezer right away. You got to remember, this is close to coming off of COVID. We couldn't even find a walk-in freezer this large. We finally did. That took close to probably about 6 to 8 months, and it had to come from the States. But the elders really wanted to go back out to the site where Nuchoga was found to bless the site, and just to see. They're trying to figure out how she died, and I think the spirit and her being one of our ancestors, they connected right away to it. They were starting to ask questions right away. So. Again, this is 2.5 hour drive, and it's not like a normal, nice paved roads you have here. This is like hard roads to get into. And this is the day after that big rainstorm. So, of course, and I'm taking close to 16 elders out and a contingent of probably about 20. Choppers are really hard to find. The only way to get my elders in fast and out is that I had to come up with trying to get helicopters. This is mining season. All the helicopters are usually booked at that time. This day happened to be 3 of the airlines or the choppers were available, and we went to that site within 20 minutes. As soon as we went to this site, you can see there's a lot of muck, and I'm up to my knees. I got stuck, and it took probably about 25 minutes to get out. And the smell also too is really strong. It's a pretty neat place to be at, and so we started with a blessing and a prayer. We have elders there preparing to do that. And again, that's all protocol to do it out of respect. And also there's a lot of emotion. Your mental brain just can't fathom this. The workers were kind of scattered. And they're young workers, they're older workers. And we flew in there, and it was almost like it was so hot that day also too that all the rain it created like a sandstorm. So we were dropped in there. Brian right away, without even knowing and prepping or asking questions, he had a tent set up. He had meals prepped, and he invited the elders. And this is doing business in a totally different way. And Brian was good at doing that. You're trying to earn the trust of two groups of people that have been pretty much decimated for years. For miners coming in and taking what they have and just leaving a lot of mess. But this is part of setting precedents also too. So we went in, we ate, and then we went down to the site, and we did the blessing, and it felt good after that. And also just to, and the elders really wanted to do it for the workers there, just to put them in a good frame of mind. We have a elders committee that was set up within probably about 5 days. We have John Flynn. He's a citizen, but he's also mined all his life in the Dawson area. We have the ED, which is the executive director, and we have the Hawkeye chief, Roberta Joseph, at that time. Again, politics has changed, and we have a new chief now, which is Hawkeye Darren Taylor. He's been involved with our First Nation all his life also too, and he goes back to director of lands to also chief. We have a youth, and these two youth are our language people, myself and my mother that has passed, and she passed in March when the year we found Nuchoga. And we have another elder, I call her Sis, and she's part of the committee also too. Thank you.
All right, I think Debbie did a good job of sort of introducing you to the place and what it means, and now I'll walk you through some of the geology, since we are hosted by the Earth, Energy, Environment. So this is the section in August of 2022, working there with a variety of different scientists from the University of Alberta, from the Yukon government, the United States. The site had changed in the 2 months following discovery. And the main thing that had happened was the miner had continued to mine down, and now the section was 20 meters in height, not 8 meters. And so the location of Nuchoga was no longer at ground level or on the floor of the mine cut, but was kind of up there. And it was difficult to get at. But what I want to do now is just walk you through sort of the different layers at this site. What is remarkable about the discovery site is it encapsulates the last 125,000 years of Earth's history really, really nicely. So starting at the bottom, Unit 1 is the Eureka Creek gravel. This is the gravel that housed the gold that the miner was after. And this was deposited of around 100,000 to 80,000 years ago. This is a close-up of the gravel. There's a little floodplain soil at the top there, and in that is a volcanic ash that we know was deposited around 80,000 years ago from an eruption in Alaska. So we had a really nice time sort of constraint on that lower gravel to know that it was during sort of the last interglacial period, or the end of the last interglacial period, which was, really started kind of around 110,000 years ago or so and lasted till about 80. As mining continued at the site the following year, that unit changed, that gravel changed, and we started to see trees. The last time there was trees prior to this current warm period that we're living in today in the Klondike was during the last interglacial, which is like 100,000 years ago. In that intervening time, there are very, very few trees in the Yukon on the landscape. So when we started seeing trees at the bottom of the section, we knew that we were into this sort of warm period. So this is a picture of Grant Zazua sawing one of those and getting sort of the tree ring chronology sort of preserved. Unit 2 is a cold period that follows the last warm period, the last interglacial. So there's a cold period from 70,000 to 46,000 years ago, roughly, or 55, depending on where you look. But it's when you have cold periods in the north, and remember, this is an environment that's not been glaciated. Ice sheets have never touched the Klondike before, ever. And so, but you're near them. And so during cold periods, when you have glaciers sort of circling around in the vicinity, it's very, very dusty. And that dust gets blown into the Klondike and washes into the valley bottoms and accumulates. And that dust is called loess. It's windblown silt. And when you're up close and personal with the windblown silt, it's really just really fine-grained sediment, pretty massive looking. We were able to, my colleague Brent Ward from Simon Fraser University and I managed to do some dating on this silt. It's beyond the range of carbon dating generally, but we were able to use a different technique that told a really nice story that really bracketed the age. So the lower parts of that unit are 70,000 years ago, were deposited 7,000 years ago, and then the upper parts around 45,000 years ago. Okay, unit 3, this is the mammoth unit. And remember, we're at the mouth of that little tributary. And so this is the time when we're getting a little bit more wet on the landscape. We're seeing more rainfall. We're starting to see that creek running again. It was dry during the ice ages, but it's getting wetter, and we're starting to see some water coming out. So we're getting bits of gravel in this unit and more organics preserved. So there's grasses and shrubs and things like that, and I'll show you some pictures of that. There is a very sharp contact between the cold period and the warm period, where it's becoming more organic rich during that stage from 46,000 to 29,000 years ago. Within it, as I mentioned, there's gravel coming out of that little tributary, so there's a stream flowing. We're starting to see grasses and things like that. And again, it's also frozen. And so this is the unit in which Nunchuga was preserved within. And we found these remnant pieces, and we were able to carbon date the piece of the intestine and some of the hair. And so both of those ages came back really close to 36,000 years ago. Really, really tight dating between the two. And we dated some grass that was overlying the mammoth, and we got the exact same age as these tissue samples and the hair samples. So this is when Nunchuga was alive, roughly 35 to 36,000 years ago. Then, closer to the top of the overlying Nunchuga is Unit 2. This is the cold period again. This is the last ice age, roughly, from 29,000 to 12,000 years ago. This is the last time Calgary was covered in ice, was at this time. But in Dawson City, what you have is, again, a dusty landscape. This dust is blowing into the valleys, washing into the valley bottoms and accumulating. And here we have a really nice volcanic ash, again from Alaska, that is bracketing this age that was deposited 29,000 years ago. So it's called the Dawson Tephra. And this is Brent Ward taking a photograph of it. But this is what the Ice Age sediments look like within this stratigraphic framework. So what was the mechanism of preservation? This was a key question for me working at the site. When I came back to the site in August, remember this initial discoveries in June, had some time to do some other things, and then came back in August when the miner had reached, basically the bottom of the cut. Key question for me was what happened? What could we pull together in terms of sort of forensic geology to understand how this baby was so well preserved in the Eureka Creek Basin? This is the exact location that Travis took us to and where we found those little remnant pieces on the day that we found her. And so this is a 2-meter tape here, measuring tape on the left, on my scale card on the right. So there's a mix of silt and there's a mix of gravel. Didn't make too much sense, but we could see that there were some stream channels that were preserved in the section. There's also just a lot of mud, quite a few organics. Travis said this is how the mammoth was laying on there in the section. So its feet were facing in, its trunk was going into the section as well, and its back was sort of exposed first. And it was laying on this gravel bed, and it was buried by a mud, an organic-rich mud. And in that organic-rich mud, there was organics, balls of organics that were disarticulated and separated. There wasn't this sort of nice uniform soil layer that was preserved above the mammoth. It was all these sort of rounded balls of organic material. And so that gave us a clue as to what was going on. And when we returned in August, we investigated that layer overlying the mammoth in great detail. And we were able to find clots of vegetation and turf samples from the shrub tundra when Nuncho Ga was alive preserved in this overlying sediment. And a picture started to unfold of a landslide that had come down on the mammoth at the time of its preservation. We don't know that the mammoth was killed by the landslide. It certainly could have been, but it was certainly preserved by the landslide. The material overlying the mammoth in the landslide was about 1 meter to 1.5 meters thick in the section. And you would need that kind of thickness in order to protect the mammoth from from predation following the burial. So if any part of it is exposed, animals are going to find it and they're going to prey on it. And so we found these lovely specimens of sort of the shrub tundra. And when you picked up these clots of vegetation, some of them were upside down, some of them were folded due to the landslide processes. But when you picked them up and turned them upside right, they were just absolutely perfectly preserved. There was leaves in the grass. There was chlorophyll in the grass. This is like walking into downtown Dawson City in the summer and putting your spade in someone's yard, cutting out a piece of the turf and handing it to you. Is that well preserved within the section? So the level of preservation of the vegetation within the landslide was equaled the mammoth in many ways. And so from all the carbon dating that we did through the section, especially in Unit 3, to understand the geography or the paleo environment of this site at the time the mammoth was there, we realized that there was this little gully that the mammoth was probably walking down. And this gully came out of this little tributary valley that it was found at the mouth of. And so there was kind of this down cutting that had happened in this stream. And the mammoth was likely in the wrong place at the wrong time when a slide came down on it and buried it underneath the mud on this gravel surface. If you were to see these types of landslides today, you might call it an active layer detachment slide in the technical terms, or a retrogressive thaw slump. These are permafrost-related landslides that happen. They're very common in permafrost environments. These ones on the left happen in particular quite often after heavy rainfall events, and they'll come down. I think that's probably what happened to Nuncho Ga, was one of those, and then it evolved into a retrogressive thaw slump. So without further ado, we will get Elizabeth back up to tell you more about Nuncho Ga.
So I'm going to tell you a bit more about what we understand based on her external morphology. But before we go into that, I'm just going to play this video that was taken by Holly Baziak. She used a LiDAR app on her cell phone and created this video. Okay, what do we know about Nuncho Ga? So we know that Nuncho Ga is a baby mammoth. And one of the reasons we know this is not just based on her size in that video that you saw, because she had been ripped in half. When they had put the two pieces back together, she wasn't aligned properly. So she actually seems a bit longer than she really is. But we know that she's a baby because when we look at her skull, it tells me right away she's a baby. Woolly mammoths, as they grow up in life, their skulls start to dome, and we don't see that on a baby. Babies have very thin bones. They're paper thin. They're quite flexible. They're not fused together, and this is because of childbirth. Basically, they need to be able to deform to go through the birth passage. So right away, looking at her skull, we know she's a baby. Now, she was roughly the same size as Luba, which is one of the Ice Age mammals that I introduced you to earlier. And Luba is about a month old. And there's reasons why we know she's about a month old, and that's based on her teeth. And I'll go into that a little more later. But what is really cool about Nunchoga's preservation is that even though she was unfortunately severed in half, she has all of her soft tissue bits that don't often get preserved. So she has a trunk. Woolly mammoths have been depicted in cave art, and we've known for a long time that they had this rather interesting feature at the tip of their trunk, which is, they're called fingers or processes, and basically they're very long and skinny. And this is something that you don't see in African elephants, you don't see in Asian elephants. Asian elephants, African elephants have pretty stubby processes. And when they go to extract their food, they're basically putting their fist on the ground and they're wrapping around the vegetation and they're tearing it up. Woolly mammoths, with these long fingers with these processes, they actually had the ability to grab vegetation. So it's like having a prehensile tusk, or trunk, I should say. Now, another feature that tells us that we have a woolly mammoth, beyond the interesting shape to the skull and the long fingers, is this area sort of mid-trunk, which is called a flange. Don't really know exactly what the purpose of this flange is, but there's a couple things that they potentially use them for. So one is the fact that those little fingers probably weren't covered in hair. You'll notice that Nunchoga doesn't have a lot of hair, and that has to do with preservation. Once decomposition starts, basically the attachment site for the hair opens up and the hair will start to slip away. And if there's warming in the environment, if they are deposited in a wet environment, that will encourage slippage of hair. But usually the tips, those fingers, that processes, there isn't hair. And so in the winter, when it gets cold, they're pretty vulnerable. So possibly one of the features is to roll up the tips and to tuck it into the flange. So that's one possible use for the flange. The other is in the winter, water sources become scarce. And so maybe they were grabbing some snow and then rolling it up, sticking it, tucking it into the flange and melting it, and then drinking the snow. So I've talked a little bit about the hair. When we see depictions in popular depictions, often woolly mammoths are depicted with red fur. And what we're learning from mummified remains is that actually most of them were probably brunettes. Red hair happens, there was probably blondes, but for the most part, they were probably brunettes. I was given the task of trying to sex Nunchoga. And when I had that first opportunity to have a look at her, I couldn't see any testicles. And so therefore I determined that she was female. But what I have learned subsequently is that elephants in general are a bit different than most other mammals. If we were to look at her end by her anus, we won't be able to see any sort of genitalia, regardless if they're male or female, because their genitalia is actually tucked in behind their two back legs. And the way that she is frozen right now, I can't actually access that. But looking for testicles wasn't going to help either, because elephants basically hold their testes inside their intra-abdominal genitalia. So you can't really look externally at an elephant to determine its sex, especially when they're young. Now, we know Nunchuga is young based on her skull, but another feature that indicates her age is to look at the sole of her feet. And what we're seeing here is pretty smooth surface. It means she hasn't walked on the earth for a long time. If she's walked on the earth for longer, we would start to see these cracks developing in the soles of the feet. Now, we were really excited when we first saw Nunchuga. We thought maybe this would be the second baby woolly mammoth to have toenails still attached. But unfortunately, there are no toenails. And it's very much the same as the hair, where they do slip off. They're made of keratin. What we do see is the toenail beds, and she has about 3 toes per foot. Now, another feature that we can see with Nunchuga when we look at her skull is that she has this temporal duct. It's something that's found on Asian elephants, it's found on African elephants. It's been depicted in cave art, and it was first discovered on a mummified remain in 2006 by Deke Mole, who was the guy monitoring the cut in the video earlier on. This temporal gland excretes something called temporin, and it's basically a way of communicating with other elephants. It can tell other elephants that you're feeling sick. It can tell other elephants that you would like to spend a little bit more time with them. It's something that helps elephants to communicate. Nunchuga, just recently we got a radiograph back of her skull, and it's really quite exciting. We had guessed that she was about a month and a half based on her size, being very similar in size to Luba. Now we can see that she has her first set of teeth, and this is something that grows in utero. It starts off when the mom is pregnant, and then it erupts basically upon birth, and then those teeth will disappear at about 6 months of age. And so we know that she's between 0 months to about 6 months. She also has her second set of teeth. These won't have erupted. And then she even has her third set of teeth. So we need to do a little bit more work. We need to see if that second set of teeth are actually have erupted beyond the gum line, if they've started to wear, and that will actually help us to age her a little more concretely. Now, another feature that we were hoping to find looking at her external morphology was this hump. It's basically an area that's between the shoulders where there's sort of fat storage. It's a brown fat. It's a feature that we're discovering more and more with these mummified remains. With these animals that are born in the spring, they have roughly 3 months to learn how to eat, to put on some fat, and to get ready for the winter. Because if you don't put that fat on, if you don't have fat storage, you're not going to survive. So when we looked at Nunchuga initially, we couldn't tell if she had that feature just because of the way she was excavated, because of the displacement that happened when she was excavated. But looking at the radiographs, it looks that she might and probably does actually have that fatty tissue storage. So sadly, because she was cut in half, she's not complete. But what it presented us with was an opportunity to do a little bit of an internal investigation of her. So part of her intestine, we were able to radiocarbon date it. So while we were cutting off, we had gotten permission, we were cutting up a piece of the intestine to radiocarbon date. we thought, well, there's material inside of this intestine. Why don't we investigate what this material is? Because it was brown, there was bits of plant vegetation, had a very strong smell. It smelled fermented. And so we sent it off to Jennifer Galloway and her colleague Leanne Tingley to look at the pollen. It was quite poor in pollen. There really wasn't quite a lot of pollen, but there was some grass, there were some forbs. But she ended up sending it off to her colleague to look at the compounds that were inside of this intestine. So we had a theory. And it's not an unusual theory or an unusual practice. Luba, when the scientists were able to do an investigation into her internal anatomy, they discovered that she engaged in this one particular behavior that's called coprophagy. So it's basically eating feces. And the reason why she would engage in that particular practice is because when the babies are born, they have no internal gut flora. And you're drinking mother's milk, and so it really doesn't matter at that point. But when it matters is when you start to explore and you start to eat vegetation. So vegetation has a lot of cellulose in it. And in order to break down the cellulose, you need to establish your internal gut flora. And the easiest way to do that is to consume somebody who already has some of that. And the easiest substance to consume is actually feces. So elephants do it, hippos do it, rabbits do it. It's not unusual. And it seems to happen throughout their whole entire life. And so this was sent to Jamie Caesar to look at the molecular compounds inside of the intestines. And what we're seeing here on this graph over to the left-hand side is that there's a lot of fatty acids. And these fatty acids actually indicate that Nunchuga was indeed consuming mother's milk. The signature is very similar to what we would expect modern-day elephant milk to look like. So that's all the fatty acids there. There's 10-hydroxy. I'm not going to bother because I'm just going to bastardize it. Basically, that big peak just off right in the middle, that indicates decomposition. So this is adipocere. So this is when fats start to break down, which is actually a really good sign because it shows that there wasn't contamination from the outside environment. So she was in a state of decomposition. Also, what we're seeing here off to the right is cholesterol, and then what happens to cholesterol when it breaks down, which is this copper stanol. So what this says to us is that she actually, at this point in time, had an established gut flora, because that is the only way that you can break down that cholesterol into that copper stanol, is to have that established gut flora. So she probably 100% was eating or had consumed her mother's feces at this point. So this is what Beringia would have looked like at the time of Nunchuga, about 36,000 years ago. We can look at fossils on the landscape. We can look at macrofossils of plants to understand the environment. And we can also start to look at the sediments themselves. So off to the left is my colleague, Grant Sisula, who spent a lot of time looking at Arctic ground squirrel nests and has sort of characterized a lot of what that particular time period would look like based on the plant fossils. Just off to the right here is Scott Cocker, who is here in the audience, who was involved in the Nunchuga project looking at the environmental DNA from the sediments themselves. And so the sediments had the potential, because we're dealing with permafrost, to have residual DNA that has been preserved in time. And basically, this is what they discovered. So there's several cores that were taken, and this is just one core that we're looking at. This is the one that most closely matches the time period that Nuchaga was deposited in. The DNA was compared against over 180 modern extinct and modern fauna, and this was the best signature. So there's ptarmigan, there was horse, there was definitely caribou, some sort of bovid, which probably was bison priscus. That was our most abundant bovage that we had in the past. There also was rodents, Arctic ground squirrels, a good candidate, and of course there was mammoth. They also looked at the plant taxa, and that was quite a bit more diverse. There was a lot of graminoids, so there was grasses, there was sedges, a lot of forbs, things like dock and sorrel, plantain, harebells, asters, things like buttercups. Really not unusual. And then probably the least diverse were the woody vegetation, and which is not unexpected. So there was willows and poplars along with dwarf birch. And this really is reflective of the mammoth steppe biome. So this was an area that there is no modern analog really today. This area stretched all the way from Spain, went across Europe into Asia, across through the Bering Strait into Alaska, down into the Yukon, passed through Alberta, made it all the way into the United States. It was virtually unchanged for about the last 100,000 years. And we will probably never see it again. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to you, Debbie.
So what was decided on what we will be doing with Nuchaga is that it was decided to preserve Nuchaga, and we looked at the Institute in Ottawa. So we had to make a trip to take Nuchaga to Ottawa. And so again, I'm moving probably about 11, 12 people. Majority of them were our elders. We did this, I think it was in March. And then again, it's our ancestor, and it's very close to us, and we have to do it in a respectful way. She will not be going as cargo, so we had to charter a plane from Whitehorse, Yukon to Ottawa. So this was done possible by us receiving funding from YTG, and we did charter our airline, Air North, and it took a day. It was a very long day. We had to do it again in a traditional way. So every First Nation that we passed, we had to stop and give them a traditional bundle. And this was again out of respect. By the time we reached Whitehorse, it was very late in the evening. Next morning, we were on the charter, and we were taking Nuchaga into the institute there. Eventually, she will be preserved. We're having a hard time to initiate that. Again, it's the preservation box that she will be put in has a default on it, and we won't be getting that part until probably end of next month. Again, this is a long time in waiting, but it's working out because we also, as a First Nation, need time to figure out what needs to be done. Yeah, thanks.
So we're just realize we've taken up a lot of your time. We're going to jump to the end. And we just wanted to say, Masicho, big thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. This is a painting that was completed by Yukon artist Natalie Parenteau last year. And I think it captures the essence of the project, of the discovery, in a unique way, with the ancestors lifting Nunchoga up to. Oops, sorry about that. Lifting Nunchoga up to sort of deliver her to the. To deliver her to the community in 2022. So we'd like to thank you for coming out, we'd like for your attention, and it's been a great pleasure telling a story here tonight. Thank you. Before we get into questions, we would just like to call up Dan and Holly and Jackson, who's in the room. They assisted us, and just one sec, we're gonna grab those things. Yeah, you got them, great. And again, one of the main reasons for presenting this talk here tonight was to formally thank you guys for your assistance that day. I know you didn't have a choice. But their role was important because we had never been thrust into sort of a forensic geology situation, and having more eyes and hands available that day, helped immensely in putting sort of Nunchoga into the right sort of place in the vehicle, and getting her under a tarp, and helping at the section, and the photographs have been tremendous. So thank you very much. We have some small tokens of gratitude here to share with you. For Dan. Yeah. Holly. Jackson. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Jackson. Thanks, Dan. I'll get one more thing.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
36,000 years old. So thank you for staying for an extra half hour or so. I think we're out of time for Q&A to do a live thing, but if you want to ask them questions in the room here, they'll be sticking around for a little bit. And if you're online, if you can hear me, oh, that one is working now. If you're online, you can email scievents@ucalgary.ca, and we'll get answers to you, but not, in the next 2 minutes.
So again, thanks very much for joining us. I'd just like to present the University of Calgary, the Department of Earth, Energy, and Environment with this photograph that we took the day after she was brought back to Dawson. So again, thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah.